Good morning. Can I have your attention? We'll go ahead and get started, and I wanted to thank everybody for joining us on today's the 6th Democratic Joint Caucus press event, and it's really nice to see all of you. Many of you came through some snow to get here. The bad news is that's kind of slick and hard to drive through. The good news is it's water, and that's really important. I'm happy to be here with Senator Mary Kay Papin, the President Pro Tem of the Senate. Today we're going to be talking about our capital outlay process and how we've worked out a compromise on that and why that's important. I want to say a couple things about how we got there and then allow Senator Mary Kay, the President Pro Tem, to talk about it. But first of all, we're on the edge of a fiscal cliff in Washington, D.C. And you have people that have not come together in one room to start with the process of what can we agree on, where do we differ, and then start eliminating the differences. And we would hope that in some small way, New Mexico can send a signal to Washington, D.C. in that we can work together across the divide. Capital outlay has always been a contentious issue. And what it's about is usually putting money on the ground, creates jobs, and it also helps build our infrastructure. One of the big parts of a capital outlay compromise, ironically, isn't Democrats versus Republicans. It's everybody wanting to do something for their own district, and that's important. A big issue on capital outlay is rural versus urban, because if you look at the biggest infrastructure projects, they're going to go up and down the corridor where most of the people live and where most of the infrastructure is. But a lot of us that live in rural New Mexico are very worried about taking care of our little rural projects. The way you'll see that when you see the capital outlay sheet is you're going to see a statewide projects, which usually end up becoming a little bit more urban because that's where the bigger infrastructure is. And then you're going to see member ads, that's the next step that we'll be doing, which usually takes on a much more urban flavor and sometimes smaller projects like acequias and mutual domestic waters. So that's kind of an important thing. I want to take a time to do something we rarely do, which we need to do more often. I want to thank staff. And some of them are sitting there, but one way to take the politics out of projects is let staff start and let the staff people get together, look at it based upon a year-long study of critical capital needs, and let them start piecing it together. They can get to a certain point, and then you have to call in the key decision makers, and then that's where that happens. But I want to thank Dennis Hazlitt, who works for my office in the Speaker's office. I put him in charge of this. I asked him to bring people together. Many of you know Linda Kehoe. Linda Kehoe works on it year-round for the LFC, and I want to thank Ryan Hedden with the Republican office. He works for Representative Bratton, the Republican leader. Dennis and Ryan got together, and they just said, let's sit down with Linda and go over the LFC recommendations and start putting together a package on behalf of Jim Trujillo, who's carrying the bill, and Carlos Cisneros on the Senate side, and said, let's put together a package of jobs, and it would be infrastructure. So that's important. It's not only $124 million, it's $224 million. $124 million of statewide spends, and then another $100 million, $50 million from the state House, $50 million from the state Senate of local expenditures. They worked very well together. The staff in the executive office did a great job. Tom Clifford, he was there in the room working together with everybody. And on the Senate side, and I'll let Mary Kay speak more about it, but we had Ron Forte, Paul Minogue, and Mike Burkhart from the Senate Democrats, and from the Senate Republican caucus, Danette Birch and John Cormanick. And many of you will remember all those names. They've had a lot of roles all over the place. I'm also happy to have a lot of our legislators, leadership, freshmen, and chairs here to stand with us on that. And I'll give a few minutes to Mary Kay to also introduce and set some ground rules and start introducing folks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And, I'd like to just again say how well the Senate and the House are working together. And again, I hope Washington is listening to this message coming from us, because I think that we are working very well together. As the capital outlay bill came down and we were sitting there pulling stuff in and pulling stuff out and doing all of that, we worked very, very well together. And so I think we're right at almost a $6 billion budget. We have to, of course, we have to be looking at schools, we have to be looking at infrastructure, we have to be looking at jobs. And I think as the speaker said, with sequester sitting right here on the edge, what is going to happen with sequester? So we also need to make sure that we have some reserves, because we don't know what's going to happen across the board, what's going to happen to the labs, what's going to happen if we lose 22 million jobs, 22,000 jobs, what are we going to lose in the service jobs that also are hinged onto that? So we need to be looking at jobs for New Mexico, and I think what we have done with the Capital Outlay bill, I think we have done our best to include the rurals as well as the metropolitan areas. And of course, I have to say, again, we can never forget what's going to happen with water. That is a huge piece for New Mexico. And if we have the problems and the drought continues and we're not able to get the water going, the agricultural business can also be a great recipient of the drought and having a lot of bankruptcies with our farmers and not being able to plant the crops. I believe, I don't know whether it was Senator Cisneros, but it was Senator Phil Griego was saying that they were telling him to be careful with the kind of seeds that they're going to plant, preparing their land, because are they going to be able to have the water to be able to even produce the crops that are out there? So I think we have so many House members. We don't have very many Senate members here other than Senator Carlos Cisneros. I just came from a committee and there were a lot of senators up in those committees. But I thank you for being here and everybody who's worked on this. I think Jim Trujillo, Carlos, you all have really worked really well together. And Representative Sandoval also has been there. And so we appreciate it. And I'll turn it back over to the speaker.
Sure, I also want to thank Ray Lopez, who works for the House Tax Committee. He worked very hard on it. He has the hard job now to make sure the bill's in order and it gets rolled out of tax, I think, hopefully today. So it's important to note it's House, Senate, Democrats and Republicans, and the executive. The interesting thing to note is we got into a room and across the table from each other, and it looked like there was a divide saying, well, you know, there still needs to be a lot of work on this. I said, well, let's just start where we agree. And to her credit, Governor Martinez said, let's do that. And we went down the list. And when you went through a list of what's going to come out to be about $225 million, just a little bit less than that, the divide at that point in time was only $5 million. So it's interesting to note, you think you have an insurmountable divide, but when you start seeing where you agree, you realize that the divide is much smaller than you probably thought. I think that template could work on almost anything, including policy issues. We're going to ask you to hold your questions to the end. I wanted to thank you for being here and having talked about that a little bit. I now want to bring up, for the specifics and to tell you a little bit more about it, both Senator Cisneros and Representative Jim Trujillo. Okay. Senator Mary Kay is going back to committee. She actually has a Jobs Council up, which is another fantastic thing.
Let me begin also by extending gratitude to the Senate staff, particularly Ron Forte, Pro Tem's office, and Mike Burkhart out of Senate Finance Committee, the staff for the minority party as well. This is a function that obviously took a lot of initiative from the onset back in November and December when LFC essentially established the framework legislation. Substantial changes have taken place, the predominant one being the withdrawal of $42 million of general fund appropriation that had to be backed out of the severance tax or the capital outlay initiative because of the uncertainty of our budgetary constraints. And obviously you've heard of all of those. Nonetheless, we went back and crafted legislation that at least gave us 222 million. 100 of that would be allocated for individual legislative local projects, and about 124 million of that for statewide projects based on critical need. And what was determined by staff, ultimately agreed to by both the leadership in the House and Senate, and of course the executive. So now we believe we've got a product that is ready to be rolled out and go over to the Senate, and we'll of course pass it on to the governor at that point. So with that, I think the job has been well done. I think at the end of the day, we're going to see that it will promote substantial development in terms of pushing forth the economy. You infuse the state with $225 million of capital projects, and you're going to have jobs, and you're going to have an opportunity for the economy to increase and develop. So that is our objective, and we're getting ready to, in effect, roll it out. And Representative Trujillo, who has done an enormous job of moving this forth, is ready to present it in committee and hopefully out to the Senate by the end of this week.
Thank you, Carlos. And I want to just tell you that everybody has helped me with this bill, and I'm going to be speaking about House Bill 337, which is the bill that is going to carry the Capital Outlay projects, the approximately $123 million for statewide projects. And there, from there on, it'll go into to the Senate, and they'll attach the local projects and finalize it and onto the governor. I want to tell you that House Bill 337 was signed by all the Democrats in the House. I went to everybody and explained to them what we were doing, and this was at the advice of the Speaker, and everybody signed on to it. And House Bill 337 is all about jobs, and jobs that are ready to go, shovel-ready, that we're going to get into the economy right away, especially if we can enact this bill with the emergency clause so we can go out and sell the bonds right away and get the projects going. These shovel-ready urgent public works projects have been through the proper vetting and are preparing to clear the Tax and Revenue Committee today. They will be rolled back into the larger capital outlay bills and passed through the House and sent to the Senate, and if additional amendments are made, it will be sent back to the House for final approval and sent to the governor. Everyone agrees that putting New Mexicans back to work is the #1 priority. So that's what we're going to do today in tax. We're going to bring this bill. It's already finalized, and we're going to send it on to the Senate. I made a few copies there. I don't know who can get. I didn't make enough, but there's a copy of all the bills that are in there and where it goes, what county, what city, or wherever it goes to, and so that you can check and see where the money's going. But anyway, I thoroughly think it's a good bill, and it's going to go through with all the cooperation of everyone, and we should get it done today. It's going to create a lot of economy, a lot of jobs. It's going to be the best thing for New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim and Carlos. I really appreciate that. As I indicated, we worked together with the executive on doing this. One that wasn't funded at the same level as the executive wanted, and it's an example of the compromise, was voting system replacement statewide. The Secretary of State came in to actually our meeting, indicated this was an important issue. Many of you saw, both before House Voters and Election Committee, the horrible stories of people waiting in long lines to vote. One way to alleviate that is to make sure we have the best technology available to us for voting. So while buying voting machines may not necessarily immediately lead to jobs, they will certainly alleviate what was a major concern in the last cycle. So I'm proud to announce that there's $6 million for statewide voting machines, tabulator systems, information technology, and also another $1 million for hardware replacement and disaster recovery, so that there's a safeguard in that. As you know now, with voting convenience centers, there's kind of printing ballot on demand. That's a technological requirement to have those printers there and to be able to do that. So that was very important. So when you go through the list, which we've made available, it's important to note that there was that in there. That's not maybe immediately a jobs thing, but it's nonetheless one of our priorities, and we made it important for that purpose. I want to introduce next Representative Carl Trujillo, and usually say no relation to the prior Trujillo, but in this case they're related, which is good, and this is New Mexico. But Representative Trujillo, one of our freshmen, bright freshman, has come up with what we think is very important, because not only do we want to spend money, but we want those expenditures to be held accountable. And that's why Representative Carl Trujillo is here to present you his bill. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Speaker. As Speaker mentioned, with the Capital Outlay process, this was a bipartisan support. It was good to see the Republicans, the Democrats, the House, the Senate, and the Executive all work together to put New Mexicans back to work. But the third component of this is people want accountability. And this is why I've introduced House Bill 345. The substitute bill will assure that the monies for Capital Outlay be spent as they were intended to be spent. This bill is to be heard on the House floor today. The state auditor will be required to select a few projects using an at-risk based approach. The money spent in Capital Outlay money isn't the government's money. It's not the legislature's money. It's the people's money. And we have a moral obligation to make sure the people's money is spent on what is supposed to be spent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Representative Trujillo. I like the fact they get right to the point and stay right at the targeted time. That pretty much does it. I wanted to say a couple of things. One is we have our chairman, Ed Sandoval, here, who has been the leader on this along with Jim Trujillo. And this afternoon, this bill will be in his committee. Is that right, Ed? That's the plan, Mr. Chairman. And also we have Lucky Varela here, who is the chair of the LFC, which is the interim committee. This bill started in the interim through the LFC, and Lucky Varela was in charge of it. He's also here to answer any questions you may have on the budget. We understand that a lot of the budget stuff was covered, but it's now in the Senate. If you want to talk a bit to Representative Varela about that, he's here available as well to answer questions about the budget and how that will be kind of done with regard to the Senate. Government's not a bad word. Compromise is not a bad word. And capital outlay, sometimes referred to as pork, is not a bad word either, because that's jobs and it's replacement and rebuilding of infrastructure. So I wanted to say that. Now, failure to compromise, that's probably, I would say, a bad word or a bad thing, because if we had just rolled out this capital outlay, which is a jobs program, on right in front of little New Mexico, standing at the bottom of the fiscal cliff, at least putting $100 million out on the streets. If we hadn't done that, then the result would have been Democrats putting in their stuff, Republicans putting in their stuff, the executive deciding whether or not it's vetted or matches what she wants, a $20 or $30 million veto. And if you veto $20 or $30 million out of a $200 million project, that's $30 million is not putting New Mexicans to work. That's why compromise is important. We have Lucky Varela here to answer any questions on the budget process. As Mary Kay said, a $6 billion package. And we're here to have any questions answered with regard to the capital outlay or any other thing that you guys would like. We could take about 3 questions. Are there any questions? Yes, Alex.
Mr. Speaker, you kind of briefly addressed this. Last year we saw millions of line item vetoes. What's your assurance? What's different this year? What's going to be different that's not going to happen this year?
We met with the governor, and she said, well, the Republicans haven't been included. I said, that's the purpose of this meeting here and now, and let's start finding out where we agree. And as I said, you went page by page by page, and on what it's going to end up being a 200 million plus document, the disagreements were about 5 million. On the statewide, there should be no vetoes because the governor has agreed to them. She came to us with things that were important to her. Part of it was the statewide voting. She called Secretary of State Diana Durant, said run across into this meeting on the fourth floor in the governor's office, explain what this is, because we were vetting the projects. We worked it out. I would be very surprised if there was a single veto on the statewide, because it's a complete agreement at this juncture. The way it's drafted, it's in a complete agreement. That's really good, because none of that money is wasted on not being expended immediately. With regard to the individual ads, we hope that those will have a light touch on them as they get up to the fourth floor, because the agreement was also that with regard to individual House and Senate members, that takes money out to the districts, and that really helps rural New Mexico a lot. So I think that's why I think we'll be able to avoid some of the vetoes from prior years.
On the, the budget and a few other bills, you've seen that there's been some Democrats voting, not with the majority. Are you troubled or concerned at all about a lack of unity in the caucus? Or?
I'm not, and I have Chairman Burrell to speak to that. This is what I would say. If you look at the items that were of concern, part of it's a $3 million expenditure, what's been referred to as merit pay. That's $3 million out of over $6 billion. So I think it needs some work. I think some of us are concerned, and I think the committee and the chairman and Chairman Saavedra did an incredible job, a very good job. It's impossible to make everybody happy, but I think the dissents are meaningful dissent, and not done in any way with regard to splitting Democrats. It's done in a manner to explain these are the problems that we have, and perhaps pointing to where the Senate may want to take a second look at some of these things. I think one of the concerns that I had, I voted for the budget. I think it was a good budget. I think there was a lot of hard work in it. And I understand what the compromises were. And one of the big compromises the Chairman will tell you about is making sure we, for the first time, do a pay increase for our hardworking teachers and state employees. I thought that was incredible. And I think you have a buy-in from the executive on that. The one issue I'm a little bit worried about, which is tied to the feds, we have the whole fiscal cliff issue, but we have a miniature fiscal cliff on the ed side, which is the maintenance of effort. And the question I have is, how do we guard against that? We do the best we can with the information available to us at the time that we put these things together. We'll be getting more information, right, Mr. Chairman, about the maintenance of effort and what the feds may respond. Many of us are worried that we may have to put more effort into that, which means more dollars. And also I think we may need to look at, in the event that there is a cliff there, that we're not given a waiver or partial waiver, that we have a way to make sure that fiscal disaster does not work its way into the classroom. But I'd like to have Chairman Burrell come and speak at this time on that question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Speaker indicated, we had to compromise on some of the issues. Before the bill was completed, we met with the governor, and the governor indicated that she wanted that below-the-line funding to be able to reward teachers for performance. That seemed to be problematic with some of the Democrats. And in the spirit of compromise, as the Speaker indicated, we took into consideration that $3 million amount that the governor wanted. It was not all accepted by all the members of the House. Nonetheless, we felt that we needed to do that in order to get the bill forward to the Senate. This afternoon, after the Senate floor session, Chairman Saavedra and I will present the bill to Senate Finance, and that'll give him the opportunity to make amendments to the bill and try to come up with an amended bill that the Senate will complete, and that then they can send it back to the House for consensus. If there isn't consensus, then there'll be a committee appointed to be able to work out the differences between the House and the Senate. As you're aware, we passed legislation years ago to open up the conference committees. So they'll be in public now in terms of if we don't have a consensus with the Senate, the conference committee will be public, and we will be able to discuss and try to come to an understanding on that particular bill. It was a difficult bill. The executive agencies seemed to be okay. The governor didn't have a problem with that. The issue was, how do we fix education in terms of limited dollars that we had? But we also had the problem of the maintenance of effort. And I'm hopeful that the Secretary of Education at the federal level, Secretary Duncan, will consider some of the waivers that we're requesting so that we don't have to reduce the reserves to be able to pay the feds the dollars that were used for the maintenance of effort in terms of special education. So the bill also had salary increases for teachers and public employees. As you're aware, we have not had salary increases for them for the last 4 years. This will enable us to compromise with the governor. She wasn't totally accepting salary increases up front, but I think she'll be more acceptable to that now. And that's why I'm optimistic that when the budget is signed and passed by the House and the Senate, that the governor will sign that bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Chairman Varela. Chairman Varela is a treasure to New Mexico and to the legislature. If you ask anybody, nobody knows more about state government and its funding than Chairman Varela, and he's done a magnificent job. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Any more questions? We have time for one more. Thanks.
Sure. Mr. Speaker, if the sequester goes through at the end of the week, what does this mean for the budget process? Is this something you guys can adjust to in this time, or do you think you need more time with a special session? What's the impact, and how does it impact your guys' work process?
The impact is devastating. If a sequester goes through, the impact in New Mexico is probably the worst as to any state in the United States of America. That's why when we show a model of compromise to work things out, we hope that that message gets to DC. The sequester would not only be the amount of money that's lost in government jobs, but it would be the multiplier effect that the service jobs that go to those government jobs. I was talking to Mark Lautman, who is basically our economic developer that's going to help us on the Jobs Council. He goes, the first thing we have to size is the result of the sequestration going through, which in Albuquerque alone could be a loss of 20,000 jobs. If you lose 20,000 jobs, the total job loss, when you look at the multiplier effect, how many jobs service those government jobs, you're going to lose another 30. So just in the greater metropolitan area alone, it could be a loss of 50,000 jobs. That's devastating. If the sequester went through, I think you would see us by necessity in a special session. I think you'd have to see us revamp everything from soup to nuts across the board, figuring how we would do it. The outcome for our seniors, the most vulnerable, for our educational system would be absolutely horrific. So we're praying that Washington understands how important this is, and I can tell you the House and Senate Democrats urge Congress and the executive at the national level to get at the same table, compromise, and work this out. Thank you. Thank you. We'll have members here if you need to ask any